Significant investment in K through 12 and higher education. You get to keep more of your own money because of across-the-board income tax cuts and a major effort toward criminal justice reform. It's all this year from the Ohio Senate. Hello everyone, I'm John Fortney and welcome to this year's edition from the Ohio Senate. It has been a very busy calendar year, full of lots of changes. We'll talk income tax cuts, higher education reform, and also significant investment in K through 12 funding. Joining us as always, Ohio Senate President Keith Faber. Thank you very much for your time.
Great to be here.
And Happy New Year and quite a busy 2015. And let's start with higher education reform, higher education funding, a major investment in higher ed that has not happened in a very long time.
Yes, we increased higher education funding across the board by roughly 8.5% in this last budget. That's a significant new investment in higher education. And we did it for a very simple reason. We want to make sure that we have opportunity for all Ohioans at all levels to get, whether it's a community college education or a four-year education. But with that, we're asking our higher education facilities, our four-year colleges and our two-year colleges, to also do their part. So we asked them to freeze tuition and fees across the board for the next 2 years for all Ohio students. The other thing we did is issued the Ohio Senate 5% challenge. And this is something I feel very, very strongly about. We ask all of our state institutions to reduce the cost of a degree. That's broader than just tuition. That's things like room and board, books, fees, tuition, all of the above, how long it takes you to get a degree, by at least 5%. We asked them to make that 5% reduction across the board. And you know what we did is we didn't tell them how to do it. And so after we got through the gnashing of teeth and the wailing at the wall, you know what? I've been very impressed that the innovation that our four-year and two-year colleges and universities have shown. They've come up with ideas, and because we didn't tell them how to do it, they've been innovative in their various solutions. So we didn't propose a one-size-fits-all solution. We let them come up with a solution that works for their own institution.
And we're talking about a lot of them came in with more than a 5% plan, 10, 12%.
Yeah, the average was close to 12%. And there are things that are going to make a difference in students' lives. For example, a four-year degree should be 120 credits. It's a bachelor's degree, it's 120 credits. A two-year degree ought to be 60 credits. Well, in Ohio, the average was closer to 140 credits for a four-year degree and roughly 75 credits for a two-year degree. So our universities and colleges are trying to reduce those credits down because, look, if you have to take fewer credits, you're going to get out sooner, you're going to graduate on time. That's a major challenge that they're funding. Another thing that they're doing is trying to figure out how to get kids to take and successfully complete 15 semester hours a semester. Because if you do that, you'll graduate in 4 years with a 120 credit hour degree and 2 years with a 60 credit hour degree. And so look, that fifth year, very expensive. It's expensive in what you have to pay for room, board, tuition, fees, but it's also expensive in lost opportunity cost. Look, you're not going to be out there and working for another year. But the most expensive, is somebody who goes for 4 years and then doesn't graduate. And so we're trying to find ways to make college, higher education more affordable.
One of the key things with that 8% increase in investment, and that's almost a record increase or one of the biggest increases really in more than a decade, that amounts to $240 million. And part of that came with the 5% challenge and the creativity to find that savings. And some of the colleges and universities proposed a tuition rebate at the end of the year, and that really made you happy.
Agreed. You know, the difference here is we didn't tell them how to do it. We told them what the goal was. And I think that's what government ought to do. We shouldn't try and micromanage from the state legislature. When we do that, usually we mess it up and people trying to find ways around it. In this case, what we did was pretty simple. We said, here's the goal. You tell us how you're going to get it for your institution. And we found innovative suggestions from various institutions, and we're putting out the list of the best practices. So the universities can say, hey, this may not work here, but that will, and we'll try and do that. Let me give you one on textbooks. We found that textbook costs have gone up 1,100% in just the last few decades. That's ridiculous. And so what we're doing is encouraging colleges and universities to use open source materials, things the students won't have to pay for. If you've got a literature class, why can't you have the professor tag things on the internet in open source that you could read instead of saying, go out and buy my book for your literature class that you have to pay me $400 for. One of our two-year colleges found that they could save, go from roughly $800 for a course for math to down to about $150. That's a significant savings to the students' pockets. Another one that, another proposal that came out of their proposals, again, these aren't our proposals, they're their proposals, was Clark State. Clark State said, look, if you take and successfully complete 15 semester hours, we're going to give you a rebate on your next semester's tuition of 10%. What a great deal. Not ours, but what they're doing is incentivizing students to take that load that's going to get them out on the required timetable. If they do that, the students are going to get the benefits of graduating on time. The university is going to get the benefit of having reduced the cost and getting kids out. The one tweak we offered in that suggestion, originally they said that at the end of the semester, they were just going to send a rebate check back to the students. Well, they might have been, you might have been more responsible than I was when you were in college. But I know when I was in college, if you sent me a rebate check back at the end of the semester for 10% of my tuition, it probably wouldn't have been around for the next semester. So they're changing that, and now it's going to be a rebate on the next semester's tuition, except for that last semester. That's when they'll actually send you the check. And I jokingly say that that's so you can pay for your apartment deposit to get out of mom and dad's basement.
Of course, it takes a solid foundation in K through 12 before you move right into the higher education, 2-year college or 4-year, of course, and another significant investment in K through 12 funding. And Senator Faber, how much more money was invested into kindergarten through 12th grade education?
Well, in this last budget, we put roughly another $1 billion more into K-12 education. And that comes right after the previous budget, which we put roughly an additional $1 billion. Now, that's a lot of money, more going to our local schools. And what we did was make sure that we're investing in the things that are going to make a difference for opportunities. And we invested across the board. And when you look at K-12 education, one of the things that we're having a lot of debate about is how do you balance quality and measurement? How do you measure quality? And so we've been going around and around for years and years on testing. And it seems like what happens is the state government gets involved, gives you more money, and then we're going to do more testing. And we had pushed testing to an extreme. And so in this budget and in the last year, we have pushed away the bad idea that we had to this park test. These long tests that were very cumbersome and almost looked like we were teaching to the test. Now we're going to still measure and look at making sure kids are performing, and so that we can rate kids in the proper way so we can make sure that we're getting academic performance. But we're going to a new testing mechanism that will be less time testing and more time in the classroom.
One time a year.
One time a year, trying to go to more time in the classroom. So far we're getting positive reviews, but you know, the Senate's approach to this was pretty simple. We knew we had a problem, and so we assembled a group of educators, from superintendents to teachers to education leaders all across the state, into a group and said, okay, we all agree we need to measure to make sure we give kids who need a little bit of extra assistance that assistance where they need it. But tell us how we can do this efficiently and effectively. And so we think we're on the right track. We'll see how it works out. Look, it's probably going to be something we need to tweak again.
I know something that you are very passionate about was Senate Bill 3. It's really education deregulation, allowing the districts that are doing well for themselves to not have to operate under some of the guidelines, or at least let them be creative and think out of the box. That is in the House right now. The Senate passed it. And I guess what was the idea really behind that for you?
Well, I hope the House takes action on it, but for us it's a pretty straightforward concept. Moms and dads and local teachers and local educated community, the school board and the superintendents, are going to make far better decisions for their community and for their students than the state government's going to be on a one-size-fits-all. We don't need one-size-fits-all solutions to education, particularly where our local school districts are doing a great job. You know, I'm fortunate to represent some of the best schools, not just in the state, but in the country. And so I'm always asked by our superintendents, okay, we get it. You're going to give us more money. You're going to ask us to do more. You're going to ask us to be accountable. But every time you ask us to be accountable, we hit the cover off the ball. No matter how you measure us, we do a good job. Why do you keep trying to micromanage how we run our school districts? Great concern. You know what? They're right. And so Senate Bill 3 is to try and stop that micromanagement from Columbus. It's trying to allow successful school districts, successful superintendents to manage their own schools. And it's things like, why are we requiring them to have certain square footages and certain setbacks and certain other requirements in a one-size-fits-all requirement? Why are we requiring them to do everything the same way without giving them the ability to be individualized in what they need to do in their communities?
I thought one of the best examples of that was maybe there's an astronaut or somebody out there who doesn't necessarily have a master's or a PhD or the right teaching certificate, but they'd be willing to teach a math class.
Oh, great example. And this is something we put in there. Look, if you have a retired general from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base whose entire career has been launching satellites into space, decides that, hey, I want to go back and teach high school physics or high school math, you know what? We're telling them you can't do it. Sorry, General, you're not good enough. You need to go get a teaching degree. I'm sorry, you have a PhD, but you need to go get a high school teaching degree that has the right box checked, and then maybe we'll talk to you. Well, the reality is we're passing up a lot of great people that could help motivate kids and a lot of great people who could do the job. And who's better to make that determination? Do we need a state bureaucrat in Columbus to decide whether they're going to be good in the school classrooms? What about allowing the superintendents to make those decisions with your local school boards? And so this bill gives local flexibility to local superintendents and to put local professionals. Look, you might have a business leader who started up their own company, doesn't have the right 4-year degree, but would be a great person to come teach entrepreneurship or innovation. Okay? And look, if they don't work out, here's the great thing about it. They're not tenured. You can say, thanks for your time, but we're not going to have room for you next year. The other thing you can do in this, look, if the president of the state senate wanted to come teach Ohio government in a college class, I could go teach a full blown college class. But if I want to go talk about Ohio government in a high school government class as an instructor, I can't do it. That's a problem we've got. It's a problem that cries for a solution. And again, this is the question of who makes better rules, the locals, closer, or the state. I don't think we should be micromanaging, and that's something we're trying to get away from.
From investment in K through 12 and higher education to allowing you to keep more of your own money. A significant across-the-board income tax cut is what the Ohio Senate proposed and was passed and also signed into law. And this was really a key piece of the new biennium budget for you.
It's a big deal. It's a big deal. We have now cut income taxes by over $5 billion. We made a priority a few years ago to try and put Ohio on the right path, to try and stop the tax more, spend more mentality that had made up Ohio for so long. We're on the track to do that. Not only are we living within our means, not only have we put money into our state savings account for a rainy day, but we were able to reduce income taxes across the board by 6.3% in this budget. That's not insignificant. That's a good number. But the thing that we're probably the most proud about is we stopped the discriminatory tax on our small businesses. You know, we charge income tax on small businesses that we don't charge on our big businesses. And so small businesses, those mom and pop operations that receive their income as pass-through entities, were paying a tax based on their personal income tax returns that the big business counterparts just weren't paying. And so we are in the process to eliminate that. And in fact, we eliminated that on the first $250,000 of income for small businesses.
So no taxes on the first $250,000?
None at all. After that, then we're going to make it a flat 3%, which is consistent with the tax rate from our surrounding states. Look, small businesses create more than 70% of the jobs in Ohio. We need to do everything we can to encourage them and empower them to be successful. And so this is a major approach. You know what? I was with a group of constituents, and a gentleman came up to me in April and said, Keith, I just met with my accountant. And you know what? I'm going to get this huge small business tax cut that we're going to use to expand our business. And I said, yeah, I've been telling you this is coming for a couple of years. He said, I don't believe you, you're a politician. I believe my accountant. He shows me the real numbers. That's what we're seeing all across Ohio, and that's why we're seeing a transformation. That's why we're at 4.4% unemployment. Couple what we've done in tax reform with regulatory reform. Look, we've changed, and I helped draft the Common Sense Initiative that's actually putting a common sense benchmark on new state government regulations. That little test, that asking whether the cost and benefits are aligned for small businesses, has reduced new regulatory filings in this state by 48%. We're making a difference. Ohio's open for business.
To you, with Ohio being open for business, what is the key role then of government in bringing in new business? What do you think state government should be doing or should not be doing?
Well, the most important thing state government ought to do is get the heck out of the way and allow entrepreneurs to create jobs. Look, government doesn't create any jobs. The best we can do is create an environment that allows successful entrepreneurs, successful businesses to succeed, thrive, and be successful. Now, make no mistake about it. Nobody in state government, nobody in the Republican Party, certainly not me, are out there arguing, well, we need business, so we'll have dirty air, dirty water, and unsafe work environments, and we're going to treat employees bad. That's not part of the success story. In fact, we all want clean air, we all want clean water, we all want healthy, safe working environments. And with the Common Sense Initiative, we have proven you can get there. You can get compliance in a way that actually costs less, in a way that makes sense. Without doing a one-size-fits-all compliance model, you can have different rules for compliance for the paint shop down the street versus the General Motors paint booth. Okay, you can have different rules because they're different threats, they're different dangers. And by doing that kind of regulatory reform, we're making a difference. That entire environment, when you couple tax reform, the tort reform that we've done, and the regulatory reform, we've created an environment in Ohio that's being competitive with the very, very best, most competitive states in the country.
Quickly, is part of that environment, that business environment, having the state be solvent with the $2 billion rainy day fund?
Well, fiscal solvency is huge. The state, we've actually increased, got an upgrade in our state fiscal health and fiscal rating while the country's was downgraded. Part of that is because of the fiscal management of John Kasich and the legislature. Make no mistake about it, when Governor Kasich came into office, we had an 89-cent rainy day fund. You could take the entire state savings account, go to McDonald's and not buy a cup of coffee. Now, after good fiscal management, after discipline, after making sure we're doing what's important, that rainy day fund, that state savings account now is over $2 billion. I jokingly say that's 2 billion cups of coffee. The reality is we're not buying coffee with it, we're setting it aside. Now some on the other side say, well, you got $2 billion in the savings account. That's important. Why don't you just spend it? Let's send it to other people. Let's send it to local governments so they can spend it. Or, let's spend it on this or spend it on that. Or I love the term investment. Investment's what you call when you want to spend other people's money. I call investment when you spend your own money for the future, but it's a little different perspective. But let's talk about that savings account for a second. 5% of the state rainy day fund is $1.8 billion. 5% of the state budget's $1.8 billion. So we're just a little above 5%. Our entire state spending, our entire rainy day fund won't even get us through a month of state spending. So it's important that we stop and think about it for a second. It's important to have savings. I've always heard that families need at least 6 months of their income in savings. We don't even have anywhere close to that. We increased it from 5% to allow up to 8% in savings to be set aside. But we're still not even talking about a month's worth of state spending.
Did you know there's more than 50,000 inmates right now in Ohio's prisons? And because of that, this year brought a serious effort toward criminal justice reform called recodification. And it is getting a lot of backing all the way from key players from politics nationally all the way to Hollywood.
It has, not just sort of heart and soul importance, but it has a dollars and cents importance, because we know that prisoners who have the ability to be successful by rejoining a group of people who care about them are much less likely to return to prison.
With a master's and doctorate in social work, Patrice Palmer knows the challenge and the reward.
Being able to watch people walk through a process and restoring the value, the dignity, and the worth of a person, we restore a productive citizen back to society. So having an opportunity to do that is amazing.
Patrice's own story is amazing. She understands what it's like to have drugs run your life and what it's like to be an inmate.
I wanted to become the change I wanted to see. So breaking those cycles, gaining an education, earning 3 degrees and a doctorate. I've only been home 12 and a half years. So it was important because I had to break the cycle in my own life before I could do it for somebody else.
Becoming that change is the direction and goal of the Justice Action Network. The group's mission is to reduce the prison population. It took special notice of how Ohio is tackling the work with the Recodification Committee and supports the effort.
We know that these reforms work. We know that you can safely reduce the prison population and associated costs to the taxpayers while at the same time dropping the crime rate.
There are more than 50,000 inmates living in Ohio prisons. 25 years ago, there were 31,000. Today, the cost of incarceration runs about $25,000 a year per inmate. Grover Nordquist is the founder of Americans for Tax Reform and believes the goal should not be building more prisons.
There's a great deal of waste in our criminal justice system. We're putting too many people in prison for too long.
Litigation is expensive. Diversion programs instead of prosecution and prison time might be more effective and efficient for both offenders and taxpayers. Nationally, the ACLU's Campaign for Smart Justice believes that conversation is best carried out in the State House
instead of the courthouse.
Our focus will be working with state legislators and local leaders to try to introduce new reforms that are focused on solutions and positive outcomes for communities.
And those communities still must be protected from violent and repeat offenders, something Senate President Keith Faber wants to make clear.
This is not about being soft or hard on crime. It's rather about being smart on crime.
The Recodification Commission is currently studying an effort to really slim down 5 very tall stacks of Ohio Revised Code. This is really an initiative led by you and your desire to streamline things and to be smart on crime.
Right. About every 20 years, generally, the legislature goes back in and does a wholesale review of our criminal code. Things that are crime, things that shouldn't be a crime, things that aren't a crime that should be, the whole assessment. It's been over 20 years since we did it last time. It's time for us to do this review. So we put together a task force made of people who are very smart in this area, from judges to prosecutors to sheriffs to lawyers and citizens, a member of the Supreme Court. And their job is to simply take a holistic view of the criminal code and say, look, we all want the bad guys to stay in jail longer. We want to make sure we have room to keep them in jail, but we also probably need to take a look at the things that have become crimes that have creeped in over years that maybe shouldn't be a crime anymore. I used to jokingly tell this story that it wasn't too long ago that you used to have to walk in front of your horseless carriage swinging a lantern at night. And if you didn't, it was a crime. Well, the reality is that's probably not good anymore. But for years and years, that crime still remained in the state code as a requirement. Now, nobody followed it, but it was still in the law. Those are the kind of things we need to do to take a look at. You know, I say this isn't about getting soft on crime, it's about being smart on crime. Let me just give you some numbers to bring this out. You talked about the 50,000 people that are currently in our jails, our prisons. The average stay, this is everybody from people on death row to lifetime without parole to the people who walk through, is 2.26 years. That means we're not holding people in prison very long. What we're really doing is taking a lot of offenders who are lower level offenders, because you don't get sentenced to 2.2 years if you're there for something very seriously, and sending them to criminal boot camp, giving them training on how to be better criminals, and sending them back to our communities. The reality is that's not good for society, it's not good for our communities, and it's really not good for those individuals. Now, the people who are bad, we probably want to keep in prison longer. We want to keep them there forever. But 41% of our inmates are there for less than a year. That's a striking number. And so when you think about what we're trying to do, let's figure out who needs to be there and who doesn't.
Turn them into taxpayers then.
Well, I'm about moving tax recipients, I always call them tax takers, into taxpayers. Part of this is looking at the populations that are what I call the repeat offenders, the frequent flyers, and making sure we're doing things that make a difference. Look, if you're a bad guy, I want to lock you up forever. If you're a sexual predator, if you're somebody who's preying on children or people who can't take care of themselves, I don't have any sympathy. We got a place for you. Okay, we'll always have a place for you. But as we go forward, let's figure out what we can do. A large percentage, and I've heard upwards of 70% of the people in our prisons and our jails are there with mental health issues or substance abuse problems. Well, it's not doing society any good to warehouse them at $25,000 to $28,000 a year in our state prisons, only to turn them back out in a couple of years with the same problems and see them come back. Let them rob your house to pay for their drug habit. That's bad. And so the question is, can we treat them? Can we get them into a place where they're doing better? It's also not, frankly, a very caring thing to take somebody who's got a mental illness and say, hey, we closed down the mental health facilities because we don't want to warehouse people anymore. So go stand out in the street and be homeless and then go assault somebody when you're having a psychotic episode. And then we'll lock you up. We'll have a place for you, but we'll pay, instead of giving you treatment that costs much less, we'll warehouse you at $28,000, $29,000, $30,000 a year. So ultimately, those are the kind of things we're having a discussion in. We're trying to improve and do it in a way. And you know, look, conservative organizations, I always point out that Grover Norquist, not exactly a flaming liberal. He's head of the Americans for Tax Reform, the same guy who says you should never ever raise another tax, has come out in favor of criminal justice reform. You know why? He says, one, the conservative thing is to be efficient and make sure you're not spending money on people in the more expensive way. And the best way to do that is not just to warehouse people, it's to stop the cycle of recidivism. And so that's what we're trying to do, and certainly I'm happy to continue to work towards that end.
Now we head into the new year, of course, the new biennium budget, but still a lot more work to be done as well. What are your key issues, your key thoughts on the agenda coming up?
Well, we're still putting that together. My colleagues and I will get together in late January and start putting our agenda together. But here are a couple of things I can tell you we're going to be working on. One is we're going to take a look at how to make state government more efficient. One of the things that we do with regard to boards and commissions is we have something called the Sunset Review Board. And it goes out and looks at all the boards and commissions and see which one we should get rid of and which ones we should keep. There was a federal Supreme Court opinion that effectively said we've got an antitrust problem in the way we do some of our boards and commissions. So we're going to look at restructuring those. But hopefully part of that is eliminating a bunch of them and consolidating operations, because frankly, we pay a lot of people to run these. We can do it more efficiently. The other thing is that same concept of doing reviews periodically to see if we still need them, if their mission is still what we want it to be, should also be applied to state agencies. We have over 20 state agencies that report to the governor as cabinet level officials. Is that enough? Is it the right number? I think it's probably too many. But as we go forward, we need to look at what their mission is and how effective they are at achieving it. Other states do this. They do it on a rolling basis. And so we're going to be looking at implementing some type of agency, state agency, review and sunset provisions to have them come back before the legislature to review their operation and their mission. I think it's part of accountability in state government. At the same time, we want to make sure we're promoting and encouraging them to be efficient. The best way to do that is to let the state bureaucrats know you're going to have to explain yourself in front of the state legislature every few years. It's going to make you a whole lot more responsive.
Huge year for the entire state of Ohio. Of course, they say, so goes Ohio, so goes the country. Huge presidential election year. John Kasich on the ballot, of course, and also the Republican National Convention in Cleveland.
This is going to be a big year.
Spotlight year for Ohio.
Look, Ohio's shining. I was up in, I always hesitate whenever a guy like me says it. It probably proves it's not true, but I was up in Cleveland for the presidential debate, and I said Cleveland's becoming kind of a hip town. The reality is it's not the same Cleveland that when I grew up. And we've got a lot to be proud of in Ohio, from Columbus to Cleveland, Cincinnati to Salina to Coldwater to Coshocton, all across this great state. And so I tell people all the time, Ohio is moving forward, and the nation's going to see it in this political year. We will be ground zero for presidential politics in 2016, just like we were every presidential election that I can remember.
Still the must-have state in your mind, 18 electoral votes, the bellwether?
You do not become president as a Republican without carrying Ohio. And if you're a Republican out there, make sure you get out and vote in the March primaries. I'm biased. I'm for Governor Kasich because he's been willing to lead. He's helped turn Ohio around. But whoever your support, let's make sure we pick somebody that can change and has a vision to move America forward like Ohio's moving forward. I'm going to be active on the state scale to try and help elect people that are going to achieve things that make Ohio and the country a better place for my 8 and 10-year-old to live. To me, that's what this is about. You know, I talk to my colleagues all the time, and I hear from them the same reason I serve is the same reason they serve, to make Ohio a better place for our kids and grandkids. And I think this year, Ohioans, you're going to have the national spotlight to tell America what you think's important. And look, if the country ran more like Ohio runs, we'd all be better off. Maybe that dysfunction that is D.C. Would be mitigated, and we could actually get a government in D.C. that moves forward.
Insightful as always, Ohio Senate President Keith Faber. Thanks for your time and Happy New Year to you.
Thanks for having me on, and Happy New Year to everybody out there watching as well.
And as always, you can find the very latest developments from the Ohio Senate. Tune in to our social media channels. That's at Ohio Senate GOP, at Ohio Senate GOP, also on YouTube and Instagram. Tune into that, and on the web, it's ohiosenate.gov/Republicans. From the Ohio Senate, I'm John Fortney.